So for everyone that's joining us now, this is Richard Hill. He's written a book, Mirroring Hands, with Ernest Rossi, the man who studied with Erickson. There he is, let's see. Perfect. He's worked with Ernest Rossi, who was Erickson's sort of, what would you call him? He's kind of...
well, Erickson said himself, he was his principal student.
Yeah. Okay. So,
yeah, and he was actually the principal author of all the books in the last, say, 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I read a book of his years ago called A Sentence Path to Healing. I think it was
Enlightenment.
Fantastic book. Yeah. So, and we base a lot of our work on that book and stuff.
That's the precursor to this.
Is it? Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So, enjoy yourself, everyone that's listening. Have a great time, and let's all learn something phenomenal. Okay. And I'll switch myself off, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Okay. All right, everybody. Now, by all accounts, you have me full on your screen. Otherwise, you have me with a still picture of Freddie and a still picture of Nick, which is fantastic because they both look really good and it complements me really well. Oh, hi, Anne. Great. Yeah, cool people. Guys here. Now, I've got about an hour to yabber on. I've opened up the webinar chat. So, please feel free to pop in a question or a comment or what the hell are you talking about, Richard? And I'll try and so my eyes will go off. I'm not ignoring you. I'm, reading the shopping list. So that'll go as we go along. As Freddie said, I'm a little bit used to this sort of thing. We actually do a weekly sort of podcast and Zoom thing with the work I do with the science of psychotherapy, which is more the academic work. But this is the real thing that's brought me into everybody's a bit of attention in the last year or so, which is quite interesting. So this wonderful book by this guy, he's quite nice, but this guy is just the most beautiful, wonderful person in the whole world for me. In fact, if ever you see pictures of Ernie, and if you go onto my website and you see pictures of Ernie and I together, it kind of looks like father and son, or uncle and nephew, and it's really a father and son thing. Now, Rossi was really the principal writer of the last few books and the last 5 years or so of Erickson's work. But what was done then was that Erickson would always be the lead author, so it would always be Milton Erickson and Ernest Rossi. And it was unbelievable when we were discussing, he said, you take the lead author and put me on the cover as well. And it's been enormously helpful. Mirroring Hands is the process. Freddie was just alluding to the earlier book, the Symptom Path to Enlightenment. Lovely to be pretentious and just be able to pick it out of the shelf. But what Ernie wanted was a book that everybody could read, and that's one of his. He's so advanced. He's so forward thinking. And he kind of liked my Australian way of approaching things. So that's how we got going. So I've been working with Ernie as an apprentice, not just as a mentor-mentee situation, but as an apprentice since 2005. I saw him at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference in 2005. I just fell in love with everything he was saying. And it wasn't too long before I fell in love with the man. And I just would not let him go. And it was a very, not hard or difficult apprenticeship, but it was very testing. It was unacceptable to write to Ernie just to say hello. I needed to write something that was intriguing, that was fascinating, that was new, that was thoughtful. And he was constantly pressing me to know and explore what was going on more and more. And he would sort of go on and, he'd say, you're pretty good at neuroscience. How are you at genetics? So off I'd go. And I started studying genetics. And then, of course, in the last few years, he said, you're pretty good at all that. How about quantum? And so we've all been exploring that as well. And I guess if there's something that I can contribute amongst everything is really an enormous depth, I hope, of sort of knowledge. I kind of like that knowledge thing, that knowledge expansion. as it turned out, partly because of the educational system in Australia, I've got three master's degrees plus a degree in linguistics, and the last master's degree was in brain and mind sciences at the medical department we learned here. So there's a lot to know, but there's not necessarily a lot that everybody has to know, but somebody has to know it. We have to find a reliable person to talk about it. But what all this knowledge has done is made me more and more comfortable and more confident as time goes on with actually removing the influence that I have in the therapeutic experience further and further and further back. And actually, it's more about like I was for the first 25 years of my life, where I had this really intense training for psychotherapy, for working with human beings, for getting and building a sensitivity, which we'll talk about in a moment. A really in-depth study of that, and it was called Being a Professional Actor. And it was actually, I thought I wanted to be famous and be on the cover of, magazines, but actually no, I didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do was I wanted to understand how to be people, how I could be more than just myself, and that other people, then I could perhaps understand them more. So I suppose the biggest difference, the biggest shift of perspective and approach that I'm going to be showing you today is what Ernie and I called client responsive. So it's really a matter of more than sort of client-centered, which Carl Rogers encouraged us to be, and moving even further back of not taking the initiative, but being responsive to the client and utilizing all the knowledge or the information or the sensitivity or the history or the humanity that you have to enhance and enable the client's experience. Now, I suppose that, just putting it bluntly, I don't do any process. I don't do the arrow technique. I don't do EMDR. I don't do CBT. I don't do the SWAN. I don't do timeline. I don't do any of those things with a client. The client does those things with me. And here's the first lesson that I'm comfortable with now that I want to share with you, is that all therapy that no therapy has been invented by anybody. All therapy has been the sensitive observation of a human being and what they already do. And what we do then is, by observing this, certainly it's wonderful. We pull it out and we explore it and enrich it and give it some sort of process that we can utilize and understand. And so what I find is that people will do exactly what Freddie does in the arrow technique. And Freddie noticed it there. And sometimes, certainly, people need to be given that further direction and further guidance from the therapist. But what's interesting with mirroring hands, let's just now explore this emergent property, because I know sometimes I go off in all kinds of different therapeutic approaches and different ways, depending on what the client is most suited to. So I just want to let you deal with this idea that actually these things emerge from clients, and we'll give some examples as we go along. But one of the most important things that you want to know is, why mirroring hands? Why hands? I mean, this is sort of the process you see, and as you see on the cover of the book, and you'll see hypnotherapists all over the place, and psychotherapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and acting teachers and all kinds of people everywhere. We use the hands, and they become usable in the process because they, by their nature, exist very large in our experience. They exist very large in our neurobiology. In fact, the hands, as the muscles in the hands and the sensory perception in the hands is one of the largest bits of real estate in the sensory motor cortex that we have running across the top of our skull in between the frontal cortex and the parietal and temporal behind it. And so what this does, it creates a situation where these hands have an additional sensitivity. And this sensitivity can be utilized very effectively. And we utilize it all the time. People forever come and say, well, I've got this and I've got that. What do I do? But they're being too busy in their heads. So they miss this wonderful process that can be done with the hands. So in mirroring hands, we use them as receivers, as places in which people can safely work with their difficulty, and also to differentiate the elements that are occurring. Now, this is the wonderful work that Freddie does with parts therapy. That's really just all we do. We differentiate the elements and we create parts. And that's a great way to work. The big difference with all the stuff I do is I don't guide or instruct or suggest for the client to go anywhere. I allow as best I can, and most of the time, 90% of the time, this is the way it goes. I allow the client to find their own suggestion, their own guidance, their own process of moving forward. So while you're out there, instead of working with the hands just yet, we'll do that in a second, I want to show you how influenceable the brain is. Mind and brain, we could spend an hour talking about that. But just this state of awareness that we've got and the way our bodies respond to that. So here is an insight into why I don't like saying terribly much unless it's really necessary or unless it's directly responsive and integrated with what the client is saying to me. So if you'd be so kind as to do this little sort of mind experiment. And in order to just make it easier, it's always good to close the eyes because that reduces the amount of stimulation from eyes. And we're kind of eye oriented, like dogs are nose oriented, we're eye oriented. And I'm just going to give you a verbal stimulation, I'm just going to add something verbal into your experience. And if you could just notice what happens, what goes on, what occurs. So anyway, and if you don't want to participate, that's okay. You can listen to the story afterwards. So here we are. If your eyes are closed, just quietly, this isn't a hypnotic experience, although everything's a hypnotic experience. Here comes the stimulus. No. 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 Okay, that's enough of that. What happened? What did you feel? What did you notice? What did you think? Now, I don't know whether any of you, feel like just tapping down a word or two in the message panel. You'll notice that that's the chat panels. There's at the bottom of the screen in the middle there's a little thing called chat. You can do that. But as you're sitting there, I've done this many, many times, as you could imagine. And so people say various things. They say they feel a tightness. In fact, I feel a bit of a tightness in my chest now, even just saying the words myself. Some people, Kathleen sensed this, a curved wall. Freddie got slightly angry. Yeah. A churning in the stomach. Look at that tension, Nick doing. Felicia's just a pressure on the chest. Your breathing tends to alter. An unpleasant tingling in the tummy. And Anne-Marie, absolutely. Yeah, I just turned off from it, not listening. Tension in the shoulders, weirdly pushed or constricted. Amazing. Okay. Now, I tried to blank out. Yeah, a lot of people do that. One of my favorite one is people who say, I turned the word no into K-N-O-W and made it a positive, which is really, there you are. See, guys saying exactly that thing. I was taking it as K-N-O-W. And Carissa, why can't I see the other participants writing? I'm not sure, Carissa. Check in your 2 where it says all panelists down the bottom there. Make sure it says not just to me. Anyway, pause now. Thank you, everybody. That's fantastic. Now we're going to do another one. So close the eyes again. I'll give you a different stimulus. Here we go. Yes. 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 Okay, Doc. All right. Now noticing, just being sensitive to yourself. What happened that time? What's sort of feeling? Someone got happy. Anne-Marie, yeah, fantastic. Susie started to smile and couldn't actually got this relief from Nick. I've heard that many times. Smiling, wanted to smile, feeling light. Freddie, you also began to smile. We could talk long and hard about the polyvagal theory and socially engaged muscles in the face, but we won't. More pleasant tingling and in my upper body. A relaxation in the tummy, felt lighter. And Karusha, for me, the no tended to contract my right hand, and the yes gave something lighter in my left hand. So you actually felt already this heightened awareness that the hands do. Now, having done that, although that seems like, oh, okay, that's cool. No, that's a negative sort of a word. It's got a high iconic representation right throughout our lives. Yes, a very representative word of positive and moving forward. But here's the key of that exercise. I managed in the space of 60 seconds to change the way your breathing happened, the way your chest felt, the way your stomach felt, where you were feeling sensations, what your hands were doing, what you were thinking, how your facial muscles and your socially engaged systems were working, probably what was happening in gene expression, and you were already starting to produce cortisol and starting to activate, and then shifted into oxytocin and vasopressin and a few other different things in your brain. All that happened in the space of 60 seconds with me interjecting 2 words, albeit powerful words, into your experience. So this is kind of the framework behind the benefits of being client responsive. And I'll give you a really good example of how we use this in mirroring hands, the mirroring hands approach, which I use the mirroring hands approach in life. I use it in every other form of therapy, because not everybody wants to do hypnosis. Not everybody wants to do mirroring hands. Some people, God help them, want to do CBT. Okay, I'm with you if that's where you want to go, if that's what strengthens you. We use the incomplete sentence. And I mentioned that in the notes of where we go. And it's one of the most extraordinarily powerful tools. And I'm sure some of you use it some of the time. But we really use it because we're oriented towards not putting into the client. We're oriented to responding to the client. So I had a wonderful client. She came in. And she's sitting there first thing, and she's quite agitated and quite sort of, she was sort of squirming in her seat, and she's telling about all these difficulties and worries she has and so on and so forth. And I thought, oh my gosh, you are so anxious. Ooh, this is awful. Anyway, when it came to reflecting back to her, and I know it's absolutely normal in our training and absolutely normal in our empathetic engagement and building up the rapport to reflect back to someone what we see, and for that to be sensitively attuned. And so for me to have said, thank you so much for sharing what I've been listening very carefully, and I am feeling how anxious you are at the moment. Now I wonder what it is that we can do, or what would you like me to do about this anxiety? Perfectly normal thing to do, perfectly well accepted. And over 15 years with Ernie, what I say now is, yes, I see you're having this experience, and I was really tuning in, and I kind of feel like you're really very, you're feeling, and just leave that gap. Now, 99% of the time, people will fill that gap. People hate a vacuum. But this particular girl said, oh, you're so sensitive. Yes, have you got a bathroom? I'm dying for a pee. So all that wriggling was because she actually wanted to go to the bathroom, but she wasn't prepared. I have no idea what would have happened if I'd said, I think you're anxious. I don't know whether she would have gone, oh, yes, that's what I am. Can I go to the bathroom now? I don't know whether she would have gone, oh, my God, he thinks I'm anxious. Oh, I must be anxious, and actually hold on even tighter because I'd given this impactful word and put into experience. Anyway, she went to the bathroom, she came back, she sat down, she said, oh, that's so much better. And by the way, I'm really anxious. So it was great. Off we went. And it is quite extraordinary how much impact you can have when you're doing this client responsive approach. Now, I appreciate that if you're doing there are many approaches and many techniques and many processes. The Americans have processes. It's actually easier to say, but processes, as us English say, that it's very difficult to then shift to incomplete sentences because you're actually leading them down. I want you to do this. I want you to see this. Imagine this. Let yourself imagine going here. Let yourself imagine this quadrant. Let yourself imagine, now what are you imagining in that quadrant? There's quite a lot of suggestive and directing work, which is really interesting. Oh, Robert, you have to wait till later. Now, when you use this technique of client responsive, it's where you start at the very beginning. And there was a wonderful example of and this will lead to the next sort of takeaway point. When I was in London doing the workshops last year, and we're in London again this year, actually in April 25th and 26th, something thereabouts. There's a link on my website for that. So for those who want to do the 2-day workshop on this, there's a plug for me already. But we sat down to do the incomplete sentence, and we had an uneven number. So I acted as the client, And so he just said to me, and so you've come to me, and I wonder when you're ready, can you tell me a little bit about why you're here? So you see this invitation. It's all invitation. Not now tell me why you're here and what you think I can do for you. It's when you're ready. I wonder if you can tell me why you're here. Sometimes clients will talk for 10 minutes about all kinds of things until they say what they're really there for. And I just go, oh, that's when you're ready. Sometimes it makes a couple of sessions, who knows? It varies between each one. But he said, when you're ready, tell me what you're here for. So I was a good, participant in a workshop, and I made something up. It was a bit like what we were doing. I said, oh, I'm a primary school teacher, and it's really hard to get the kids to listen to what I'm saying to them. And it was kind of a reasonable invention of a story. And he said, oh, and so, this difficulty you feel, it upsets you, and that upset is, and I said a few more things, and then we said a couple more, and then suddenly he just left this open-ended sentence. And this experience with the children, that's like, and suddenly all this stuff from my high school years just flooded back. Because when I was in high school, I desperately wanted to be school captain. I didn't get to be voted school captain, and my girlfriend did. Really pissed me off. I ran away from school and sort of sat and felt sorry for myself for some time. I thought I'd worked it all out, but clearly I hadn't. Anyway, we went through things, and I just went quiet, and I said, I'm okay. Just leave me alone for a sec or two. And I just worked through the process. Wasn't even this mirroring hands thing. It was just, it became alive. I worked through it. And I was explaining to the class afterwards, I said, what kind of genius therapist would think when a client comes in saying, I'm having difficulty being listened to by my students, would think to say, oh yes, that's because when you were in high school, you weren't voted as school captain, your girlfriend was, and that distressed you, and it's still an unresolved trauma. Because no one would ever do that. Now, what is often done with someone in that situation is that we will go in and we'll clear the distress. We might go back in the timeline, with working with schools. We might work on a limiting belief that is interfering with my confidence to speak to children. We might deal with the emotion and clear that emotion, or reduce that sense of emotional upset that when the kids aren't listening. And all those things are valuable, and all those things can help. But none of them would be the real point, which was, Richard, you've got to get over that high school crap, which I did, and I've been feeling much better because of it. So if there's a way of talking about the difference between mirroring hands and some of the more guided specific work, is that mirroring hand tries to open the experience as broadly as possible into the client's possibility field. Whereas the more we direct, the more words we add, the more specifics we add, the more we create parameters. Now, of course, very directive therapy, really pins you down. It's almost stressful. But we create parameters within which the client is working. And that can be absolutely terrific and may be exactly what they need. But when you're working in this broader sense, you're moving into the client's possibilities rather than the best intentions of the therapist's perception of which possibilities they should be working with. I don't know, does that make sort of sense? I hope that does. And I'm going to do a little something now with you. But what happens is when I do a group demonstration and 12 people are sitting in front of me, or 20 people are sitting in front of me, or as we do at Ericsson, sometimes 500, almost every person will have an entirely different response, entirely different, thanks, Ant, an entirely different physical response, an entirely different movement of the hands, entirely different depth of trance or not trance, but it's very personal and very unique. Now, that makes it tricky. That makes it tricky to do group work. And I think if you're doing group work, you really do have to set some parameters, because otherwise they're going to go off and do stuff that may not be manageable on their own. I had it in the class, the workshop I was doing just last week, where the client, the person being the client, just was doing something simple. But in mirroring hands, it always goes where it needs to go. And she went into a place and she began to cry, and there were things. And she said, "Oh God, I know I can't do this." Now, of course, the student who was learning wasn't capable or experienced in managing that. So I had to step in, but I could see her, physically traumatizing, taking back in. But I just asked her to put her hands out, put the problem out in the hands. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we worked through that. She had a lovely breakthrough. She came up and did a demonstration later, and she wrote to me the other day. She said, "I've been talking to friends of mine, and they said, 'What happened to you? You're different.'" Very, very similar to the sorts of things that you guys talk about a lot. And Freddie talks about a lot when he talks about people doing the various organized forms. I call them organized forms. They're nowhere near the horrible directive stuff. You will do this and you will do that rubbish. They're just organized forms, guiding forms. Whereas mirroring hands is just like, woo, let's just go where it goes. So as I've been talking, I've just sort of been modeling a little bit of these hands. And if you're able to, where you are, whether you're sitting or standing, just to put your hands out if you would like to participate in this experience. If not, you can just watch me and wonder, which is a wonderful thing to do. A wonderful is what I want in everybody's lives. And I wonder if you could just allow your focus of attention. We all know how important focus is and what it does, but just allow your focus of attention to go to your hands. And as you look at them, maybe look at them like you've never looked at them before. We've all looked at our hands. I do this exercise so often, is introducing mirroring hands, and my hands are always more wrinkly. It's a shame. Although it's not too bad. It's nighttime, so they're looking a bit better. Are your fingers longer or shorter than your palm? What is your jewelry? I noticed my wedding ring, my gorgeous girl. And as you really focus in on the hands, I wonder if there's anything that gives you a sense that one hand is having a different experience to the other. I don't know, is it a little warmer, or perhaps a little heavier? I wonder. I must admit I'm experiencing a little strange nerve twitching. I don't know what that is, but I'm not making it happen. It's just happening on its own. So I'm paying attention to it. And if you were to just put out just that surface, that superficial, that not really terribly important problem, but that thing that's bugging you a bit at the moment, I wonder which hand would like to receive that. Do you get a feeling, some kind of response in the hand? I'm getting one in this hand here. And almost to yourself, to convince your consciousness, maybe you could just wiggle your hand for yourself. Go, yeah, that hand feels like it wants to receive this thing that's annoying, that's a bit of a, maybe it's a little pain, maybe it's a little problem. And as you receive that problem in that hand, as that hand receives the problem, I don't know how it will receive it, whether it's going to receive it as a feeling, as a shape, as a color. Is it just, oh, look, my hand's closing in around it. I don't know. And will that hand, as it processes and receives that, whatever it is, we don't even have to know what it is, will that hand stay where it is, or perhaps it wants to move downwards or upwards or sidewards? It doesn't matter, but almost all on its own. You consciously just observing it, feeling it, just allow that problem to really reside in that other hand and be received in whatever way is good for you. Yes, I had a breath. I wonder if that's what you're experiencing as well. And I know if I was with you, I would be able to see exactly what you're doing, and I could respond absolutely directly with you. But we are at a distance, and we're more or less at a teaching frame. So can we just allow that process of receiving to conclude itself now as you shift your attention to the other hand? And I wonder what it might receive. Is it receiving, what does it feel like? Is it a, yes, whatever is not the problem, or not the, but instead it's, and does that hand almost all by itself want to, I wonder. Each of us having our own experience, knowing that you are engaging exactly what you want to engage. Yes. And I don't know what you might want to do with the problem or the difficulty you had in your hand, your first receiving hand. Mine's just kind of letting it go. You might want to do something different or be doing it even without your knowing, just realizing that you're doing something. And I'm observing that my hand is over my throat. And here I'd like to give you the suggestion that is probably the only suggestion we give in mirroring hands, is that when that part of you inside that knew which hand to receive and knew which hand to take the strengths and the possibilities, and this hand of mine that went to my throat, knows that it can continue this work at appropriate times during the day. You know, it could be every hour and a half or so, like we do in our dreams. And when your conscious mind knows that it can continue and cooperate, when it feels that time to pause and just continue this strengthening and engaging work, if you'll be able to then just quietly relax and bring yourself back. I don't know if you would like to open your eyes or roll your shoulders or stretch in whatever way is suitable for you. And maybe there's a nice deep breath. Now, there are many things that occurred in that experience. One thing I do know is it will be different for everybody. I haven't specifically resolved a general problem or non-specifically solved nobody's problem. We've just opened the doors of possibility for the client to differentiate those elements. And pardon me for continuing talking. I know we've just had a lovely experience, but it is a learning experience, so we've got to keep going. But if you could imagine these two elements blending and presenting themselves as a green square, if you could just move those squares apart, you might discover that there's a yellow square and a blue square. And when they come together, oh yeah, they make green. So what emerges, it's the emergent property from the combination and the engagement of what's going on inside that we notice. And if we differentiate, we can reduce the extent of the green square. But if we can go all the way here, guess what happens to the green square? It's gone. Even if just for the moment. It may not last beyond the moment that we're doing, such as it is with parts therapy, as Freddie does, which I love. But it'll say, so talk to this part, and what about this part? Now, I guess where I differ in some of the more organized and engaged guidance, that I wouldn't then suggest or advise or encourage the client to do anything with those parts, not bring them together, not put them apart, not anything. I say, and I wonder what those parts want to do with each other. And then I have seen people bring them together. I've had them put them apart. I've had them get rid of one and put the other. I've had people closing the door. I've had all kinds of amazing things done by individuals. And one of my students, supervising students, just the other day did parts. They went into the parts and they said, and now I wonder if you want to bring those parts together. And she looked at me and said, no, I don't. Not now. How wonderful. How wonderful in that experience. And that to me is the joy of mirroring hands. Now I want to put the caveat on this, because I look at all these things. I'm actually of the feeling that everything has the capacity to have some benefit because in the appropriate circumstances, in the appropriate environment, and given the opportunity, we will naturally move towards well-being. This is just, again, it would take me several hours to explain, the complexity of that, but it is in complexity theory. And at the workshop, we do complexity theory in a session, but all through exercises, not through rational, rationalization and PowerPoint slides. But to understand that the system prefers to move towards well-being. Now, there's a few things that it goes along. It will first go to survival. It will then go to homeostasis. It will then go to well-being. And then if possible, it will then move on to thriving. And it moves along that, what we call a phylogenetic hierarchy of necessity. But the thing that what we will do is, when we are going the opposite way in towards ill health, is that we will manifest a green square to let you know that there's stuff going on down here that needs attention. Now, of course, that's disease, and we have an immune system that will then go into all these processes. And we have a mental health immune system that goes into all kinds of actions. And again, just to let you know that I've been looking at so much, to look at the nature of the gene expression that occurs when you do a relaxation and a positive engaged therapy, like mirroring hands, like meditation, like so many of the other hypnosis effects. So the essence of what we're trying to do always is find that beneficial change. And mirroring hands does it in this surprisingly non-active way by the therapist. So what is the therapist doing then? I mean, I've just been to hypnotherapy school for 3 years and learned all these fabulous techniques and all these fabulous things and done all these NLP things, which are all terrific. And I really want to stress that I think they're all terrific. It just seems that in my experience, mirroring hands tends to resolve most things without specifically utilizing these other techniques. I find they spontaneously come out of the client. Now, I've learned NLP and I've learned hypnosis and I've learned CBT and RBT and LBJ and QRS and everything else, so that when the client manifests it as part of their natural human mechanisms, I can recognize it and I can go with them more fluently and more successfully. But sometimes they're doing something that I don't even recognize. And so I go with them anyway. As Erickson used to say, the best therapy is the one that you've never done before and you never do again, because it is the most responsive and engaged with the client's emergent properties rather than your skill and testing things. So what is the therapist's skill? It is their observation. And this is what they used to say. Erickson was a master of manipulation, and Rossi would say, no, he's a master of observation. My good friend Rob McNeely says, how do you do therapy? Observation, observation, observation. It's like the real estate agents, location, location, location. It's observation, observation, observation. But then Ernie and I are saying, and responsiveness, rather than guidance or direction or even suggestion. Now, certainly that suggestion that what I said was at the end of the therapy is pretty much the only suggestion that we give. To know that there is a natural rhythm. I mean, ultradian rhythms and the 4-stage cycle, in the workshop, but of course, on my Facebook page, you can see some of these things. That there's a natural 1.5 to 2 hour cycle that we have that takes our brain through its processes, building up in energy, having full energy, fading off, and then spending a time in recovery, then lifting again, full energy and down, and then having a time in recovery. And that 20 minutes every couple of hours or so is the ultradian healing pause. And that is where all the good work goes. That's where it all happens. And sometimes, clients are doing that at the beginning of the session, sometimes at the end. But this is why sessions really that just only go for 60 minutes can sometimes be short, and the client's just starting to break through into the valuable work. But I don't want to confuse the issue by going through too much side issues or additional aspects to the technique. And of course, yay, it's all in the book. It's all in the book. But it's that sensitivity, building that sensitivity. That's what I did in acting school. I didn't know I was doing it in acting school, but that's what I was doing. I was building up a sensitivity to other human beings, to the subtleties, to the nuance. Not so much so that I would know it and have a predetermined response or a tricky, clever response, but so that I could comfortably receive it and intuitively and improvisationally respond to it. Now, I'm also a musician, so it's exactly the same in improvisational work in jazz. So you want to learn to be a jazz improviser on the piano? Learn technique, learn the scales, learn the way it's done technically, follow the music, and then eventually you get to a point where you can forget all that because it resides within you and just play. Now, same with painting. Anne-Marie, thank you very much. Absolutely. Same with painting. Same with lots and lots of creative aspects. Because what we are as a being is something that has focus. As a focus of attention. Now, it could be totally scatterbrained all over the place, or really, really, minutely directed at some point, or somewhere along this spectrum. Focus is a spectrum. And that focus determines to some degree what emerges out of your experience, what you notice, what you're drawn to, what is drawn to you. These ideas have been sort of hyper activated and kind of greedy-ized with some of the things like, you can have everything you want, you can get lots of money, and you can get all that sort of stuff. This stuff isn't designed for the material world we created, although it's utilizable in that frame. But I don't want to go there at the moment. But we have this focus. We have things that then emerge out of the experience. And in the middle, in this space here, is what I call your orientation. Some people call it context, but I think that's a little bit different. That's environment. But it's your orientation. What is your state of mind, your state of being? Because that's important. Who you be is really important. Lots of people talk about that. Oh, where's the wonderful book? I can't put my hand on it. Anyway, neuroscientist, but fabulous, who said it's important about who you be. Now, you could have a pain-based orientation, which means that you're going to feel a lot of pain. You're going to feel it everywhere. You're going to have distress. You're going to have a fear-based orientation, an anxious-based orientation, a happiness-based orientation, or even perhaps an orientation of depression orientation. And all these, just like the yes-no was an orientation. I know oriented you, and that created all these biological states. I yes orientated you, and you created a whole bunch of different states. And what my principal work on at the moment is that the most effective, the most expansive, the most balanced neurobiological response, and pretty much all the neurochemicals get into performance and perform really well, is curiosity. And as I look through all the websites and I look through the Facebook and I watch the questions, there's masses of curiosity. It's wonderful the amount of curiosity I see. But we get stuck in curiosity for information, for what are the facts, what are the details, what's the process I use, what's the, how do I solve this problem, what's the client telling me? And we forget, well, actually, I don't know who's talking about it, but I am, that curiosity is also very much about our playfulness. We're curious to play because from playfulness, we have serendipitous emergence of information, of knowledge, of awareness that we couldn't possibly have had than if we'd done it through the investigative, detailed way. This is the big problem with psychotherapies, is the tail's wagging the dog. Let's go look for the problem. No, let's go play. And so you get a lot of somatic therapies. Peter Levine, a lot of that work. Let's just jiggle the system, like my wife does in therapy. She gets my finger, it's sore, and she says she's a body worker, and she does this, and she just does this for a while, and then at some point my finger goes click, or it goes something, or it goes pop. And I go, oh, it's much better. So in other words, we just set in confusion technique or destabilization, which created the circumstances of breaking the barrier and allowing the system to rediscover what is better for it in its better reframe. So the therapist is looking to be noticing, to be knowledgeable so they can be appropriately responsible, but to be trusting that so much of this knowledge comes from human interaction, so to go with whatever goes, and to be sensitive, I don't know how many therapists I see, particularly in psychotherapy and counseling, who sit there with a clipboard. Now, I get it. We're taking notes, we're checking out stuff, but every time you look down that clipboard, you're no longer looking at the person in front of you. And I've seen Freddie work on videos. I've seen lots of people, just an absolute focus of attention on what people are doing. And I'm really into that, and I've been told to film it. You know, you got to film it, Richard, and show people. And you know, sometimes this is where I get, it's not like what anybody else does. Am I doing something that's good? Am I doing something that's okay? It's a bit of sort of limiting belief. It's a thoughtful, appreciative sensitivity to how people respond to this framework. And for example, at the workshop on the weekend, as I say, the lass who had the big outcome, she sat down. We went for about 25 minutes. I would say there would have been no more than a few dozen words. I added a few moments of process. Her hands were doing all kinds of activity. She knew what they were. Every now and again, she shared a word or two. But I asked her on occasion, would you like to share a word or two or just continue with the private work? And she just continued, which obviously means, I mean, I've had clients who say, shush, you know. And at the end of it, she said, yes, now I know. Now I know. And I can't tell you because it all came to me in this wave of sort of emotional states, emotional feelings. I can't describe it to you. And this is the girl that everybody is now saying to her, what happened to you? You've changed, you're different. So looking at my notes and the 50 things that I've said here that I should discuss, which I haven't discussed, I mean, I'm not able to, but this orientation is terribly, terribly important. And until you can get someone into that curious orientation, and that may take a little time, and you may have to do some very organized processes for initially in order to get them in that state. Now, I said before that I have to caveat that it is interesting. I mean, I do tend to deal with sort of the pointy end of the stick. I don't tend to get people who have a specific sort of need. Just, you know, I've got a phobia or I've got a particular issue I want resolved. Although I think I'd be the same with them anyway. I want to go and see where that green square is coming from. But I do get to see people who've been to see a lot of people and have had no success, or they've had some success and it's gone backwards, or I've been recommended from therapists who don't know what to do next. And sometimes I say to them, well, just experiment, play in the right appropriate circumstances and the appropriate conditions. And that playfulness gives the client the opportunity to discover their own next step. And that I do appreciate. I had a student who said to me one time, so what do I do in this situation? And I rattled off about 10 things. And he said, but Richard, that takes so much courage. To be able to be creative in a space where the client doesn't know what they're doing. And I don't know what they're doing. And I said, yes, but you do actually, don't you? And he said, yes, but not in my head. I know it in my heart. I said, well, you're good enough. You know enough. You know your heart is going. Let yourself run with it. And he jokingly said, could you write a book with all those creative things in it? We could look it up. He was joking. So Freddie said, just keep on a little bit. Okay, Fred, it's cool. So when we're dealing with a lot of these issues that we're dealing with, some have got deepnesses to them. We could call very deep states. Now, I would like to suggest to you that from my learning and where I've been going and trying to understand this stuff, is that there's an awful lot of material that we're working with, which is actually in what we probably call it the cognitive or the conscious state, but what in neuroscience we call upper mental processing. And this upper mental processing is in that state of consciousness, but consciousness isn't a room where you just see everything. There's a bit of a light, and sometimes you have to turn the light around. And so as you change your orientation, you can see, and as you play, you can experiment and see. But one of the most important things to understand about pain, and many have said this, but I just want to say it again, that pain is two things. We have a pain network in the brain, absolutely, that picks up stimulation from outside the body and says, this is something that is not good. We have to do something about it. That's the point of pain. It is the premier stimulus to take action, to change what is going on. Now, the painful experience, what I call the painful emotion, then is an opinion that this upper level processing creates based on your history, your temperament, some of the things that you came with in your nature, your nurture, your attachment issues, whether you've had early traumas, how much are unresolved. Lots and lots of things create this pain experience. And I had a really interesting experience with a chap. He came to me for pain resolution. Now, we were 3/4 of the way down the track because he said, I know I have damage to my spine that will never resolve, and it is a pinched nerve. Don't be stupid. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to be in 2 or 3 every day. That's okay. I get it. But I constantly find myself, I'll go up to an 8 or a 9. Then I have to take this medication, knocks me out for 25 minutes, and then I can survive. He says, I can't do this. Keep doing this. What are we going to do? So I used in Mirroring Hands what we call the basic accessing question. Because I see a lot in Facebook inquiries. They're saying, what do I do with this client? The client doesn't seem ready. How do I know when the client is ready? Well, in Mirroring Hands, our approach is the client's ready when the client's ready. So ask them. Now, sometimes you literally ask them, as you say, when you're ready, let me know, tell me what you're here for. And eventually they'll do that. You might say to them, and when you're ready to connect with what's going on inside you, I wonder if you might raise your hands and just put them up in front of you. Now, I've had people who raise their hands. I've had people who leave them down. And I go, okay, you're not ready yet. Okay. Now, and I go on and do something else. There's a lot of things in my folder to choose from. But we use a basic accessing question. And remember that mesmery thing of the magnetic pull? It's one of the things we use to get a sense of whether someone is responsive to hypnosis. Do you feel a pull? Do you feel a push? We do various things of that form. And it was really interesting for Ernest Rossi because he would say, as he learned from Erickson, and the hands of, do you feel that magnetic pull or that magnetic push? And I said, but Ernie, we don't say that in when we do the basic accessing question. I said, do you just feel a connection between the hands? And he said, yeah. He said, because one day I forgot to say magnetic and everybody did it anyway. I went, whoa, okay. So there's a bit of history for you. So he says, and as the hands pull together, and I wonder when that part inside you knows that it can begin or is able to work on this issue that is troubling you, will those hands feel a pull together or a push apart, or maybe just something really holding them exactly where they are? Now, 90% of the time people do something and you go, excellent. And then we might move into a different thing. Well, they'll just go off on this stuff. Anyway, I had this guy, this pain. He put his hands up. He said, I really want to do this. I really want to fix this. He put his hands up. And I said, all that stuff. And when that part inside of you knows it's ready to work on resolving this issue of your painful emotion that you feel, will those hands come together? And he stood there for a little bit and he went, "Ah, nothing. I'm getting nothing at all." I went, "Okay, that's okay. You're not ready." Now, he'd already been telling me a lot of story about his pain. I said, "Just continue telling me the story." And I guess you'd say that's narrative therapy I'm doing suddenly. You know, he was telling stories, so we did story. So he talked about it, and he was sitting there, and he go, "Whoa, hey, oh, this hand, no." Then I would go, and he go, "Oh, this one, there's a, no." I was getting, it was a bit weird, even for me. And then he did that a half a dozen times more, and then he just at one point went, "Ah, I've got you." I think there were some swear words, I can't remember. And I said, "Wonderful, we're ready. What do you want to do with that pain? He said, "I've got it. I'm holding it. I've got it." He said, "What do you want to do with it? I wonder." And he actually ripped the pain out of his hand. I said, "And now?" And he threw it down on the ground. He sat back up. He said, "Wow, I'm a 3. He said, "I was an 8. I was just about to take some medication. Okay, now we can continue with the other work." What did I do? I tell you, nothing. A lot. I was responsive. I was engaged. I allowed him to come and go in the experience as he wished. Now, for me, there was no resistance at all. Whereas if I was deliberately trying to get his hands to move one way or the other, and that was how the process could happen, then yeah, that would be classed as resistance. But it wasn't. I was simply waiting and responding to him. There can't be resistance when you're being client responsive. It's just you not flowing. It's you resisting the flow that the client's presenting. Some might call, this sort of thing, and he's suddenly all very energized and his eyes are bugged open, as an ab reaction. Similar to, as I was talking about the woman who was having the ab reaction. That's an ab reaction. No, it's not. It's the client speaking to you about their experience. And you're needing to take that on board and respond in a way that is in attuned responsiveness to them. And then he pulled it out of his head. He did his stuff, and that's what he does. He hasn't come back anymore. That's what he does. He gets it. I think he's figuring out ways to make it a little less sort of publicly disturbing. But he grabs the pain, he moves it out of his head. And I've never written that down. I've told it to a few people at workshops. I tell it. That's it. This is his, nobody else's. So that's the way we worked with that particular one. I had another lass, and I've written about it in the beginning of the book. And she came in and she put her hand, she was doing this stuff with her hands. And I just said, "Oh, so you've got something here and there's something there?" She said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Well, let's look at those hands and let's really focus in on it." Now, she was amazing because she'd come in and said, "I've seen everybody. I know everything. I've been everywhere. No one can fix me. I'm going to see another psychiatrist. I'll come back and see you. I'll give you 60 minutes. I went, "All right, come on back." Anyway, she's doing this. We've been mucking around a little bit. She kept saying to me, "Well, that's 10 minutes gone. That's 15 minutes gone." Anyway, I got her into this stuff. So she looked at the hands, and the hands started to move, this ideomotor response. And I'll discuss that quickly in a second. We can't keep everyone forever. But she began, and these things were happening, and she started to talk about what the hands represented. And I won't go into the story because it's a very private case. But what they represented, and it was very dark and difficult. And at one point, she looked up at me. She said, "What are you doing?" Now, I actually then gave what really was a suggestion, because it was a response that was manufactured, because she told me that there was nothing I could say or do. There's no books that would know. There's nothing I could know that she doesn't know. So anyway, she said, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know. I'm just going with you. I thought, oh, she's either going to get up and run off, or I was gambling on the fact that she'd given herself the suggestion that she was going to stay for 60 minutes. Anyway, she went, okay, and went back. Anyway, we had an amazing breakthrough. She said, wow, no one's ever said that to me before. And I said, but you do realize that I didn't say it to you. You said it to you. She went, oh, yeah, cool. Gave me the money. I've never seen her again. So I told you I get sort of bizarre cases. And this idea of mental states being able to be resolved and altered simply in these upper cognitive processing. And that's cool. But when you go down lower, people talk about going down and deeper into the subconscious knows everything. No, the subconscious doesn't know anything in the way that our cognitive mind knows things. But the subconscious or the non-conscious or the unconscious, they're all used in, no one knows what they're really saying. But that stuff you are aware of and the stuff you're not aware of. Greg Turner, a mate of mine, said that just today. There's what you're aware of, what you're not aware of. But when we get down to these implicit processes, we're actually talking about gene expression. We're talking about intercellular communication with peptides and hormones. We're talking about things that are not possible for you to consciously know. The only thing you can consciously know of all these deep, really deeper elements is what you feel, the felt sense of them. I feel depressed. I feel happy. I feel hungry. All these different elements. And it's this mind to body, the putting that yes orientation in, that goes in and can shift and alter the nature of the way those inner things work. Because those inner things, given the appropriate opportunity, in the appropriate circumstances and in the appropriate environment, will by themselves self-organize themselves towards a better outcome, moving through survival to homeostasis, to well-being, to thriving. That's the work we do. We give people that opportunity to do that stuff. And sometimes we do our process and we go, wow, weren't we clever? And actually it was nothing. My favorite story, it's a bit of an amalgam of a few, but the client, it was in psychotherapy, and the therapist is working away, giving him all this stuff. And the client comes back the next week and said, most amazing breakthrough. That's been fantastic. Had the best week of my life. Can't believe what's just been happening. Thank you so much. And the therapist, not unreasonably, said, and what was it that I was working with you that was so successful? And the client said, oh yeah, you were terrific. Love what you were doing and really useful. But behind you, see that bunch of flowers you got back there? See that one? It's tilted over like that? Yeah, that's me. I'm the tilted flower. That's who I am. I've spent the week reliving, re-experiencing, reassessing my life as a tilted flower. And now I get it. And it's really good. Thank you so much. So it's not even they're saying the therapist did nothing. The therapist created the environment and the experience where this client was able to notice the vase which had the tilted flower. That's still really important, because how many tilted flowers has that client seen throughout their environmental and their experience, but just not seen them because they weren't in the appropriate condition, the appropriate environment that this therapist managed to generate. But it wasn't the clever stuff that they'd all gone to therapy school that had helped them. So this is the frame. To be there watching. Look to yourself as an energizer and an engager. Look to yourself as perhaps a suggester and an organizer. But also look to yourself as potentially having the scope to stand back and allow the client to discover their field of possibility, to move out from the probabilities that experience has taught them and drop them back into the possibility field. Now, this possibility field theory, that's in complexity theory. It's also in quantum theory. all this stuff has so much backing and so much history and so much knowledge behind it. But we get caught up in the knowledge as well. And I think I wrote it down on I wrote it on my phone, but are we creating something that controls, contains, or conforms the experience? If we are, know that you are doing that and do that because that's what the client wants. For example, someone says, well, what if a client says, I want to do Freddie Jacobs' arrow thing? I go, great, let's do it. I think that's called being client responsive. That's what the client is engaged with and feels comfortable with and strengthened with. So that's where I'd go. That's where I would go. And then maybe after we've done that, I might say, now let's put that experience here and that pain there and so on and so forth. So everything has its place and everything has its beauty and everything has its wonder. For me, I tend to find that almost all the therapeutic response I need from people is the mirroring hands approach, because so many of the things that everybody talks about comes forward. But the main thing is I get no resistance because there's no battle between us. And if there is resistance, it's because I'm not paying attention and I'm not sensitive enough. I get no ab reactions because I always take things back out into the hands. And we have this wonderful knowledge that you can say, even though we haven't completed the work, every hour and a half or so, you will have the possibility of having an ultradian healing experience. You may miss some of them, but you potentially can have between now and next week, 84 of these ultradian healing experiences where you can continue the private work that you have begun here now. And those two things seem to be the biggest problem. I also don't have the problem of what technique do I use, because the client will present to me the technique that is most suitable to them. Rob McNeely, again, quoting my lovely friend in Australia, say, ask them what they like. And it's amazing what they'll tell you. It's amazing what they'll tell you. But for now, Freddie, I think we have to thank you for letting me go on, but I think everyone's starting to, I know Sunday morning, they're wanting to have some bacon and eggs now.
I don't know if you can hear me now, can you?
Yeah.
You can see me now, I'm not sure, but yeah, it was fantastic, Richard. I absolutely loved it. Can you see me and hear me? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can see you and hear you.
I hope maybe everyone else can as well. Then let me just do this in a second.
Julie, Julie's got to go and lock up the farm animals because there's a storm coming. Aren't people wonderful? Please, I hope everything goes well.
It was fantastic. I loved it, and I'm sure everyone else did. And I've, we're not a million miles away in where we work, which is nice for me, really. Like you, I believe, the answer comes from the client, and all we have to do. I've said it a few times just recently. I just act as a catalyst to get them out their own way for a while, so they can get in touch with those feelings and get in touch with the resolution they have within them. So, it was great to hear. You made me laugh quite a few times with some of the things you said. I look forward. I'm going to come and see you in London when you're there next year. I'd love to meet you in person.
Fabulous, yeah.
Going to come down and do that. And I know I could talk to you forever. So I'm sure now. So I want to thank you on behalf of everyone that's listening and all the people who are going to see this webinar on, as a recording. I want to thank you for coming and doing this for us, taking your time out and doing it. It was absolutely marvelous. That's a very English word. Absolutely marvelous, and I loved it.
Well, I'm just so excited to be just warmly engaged into the community and for things that I've been saying and doing to be responded to with such with such sensitivity. You're saying, hey, shit, this guy seems to know a couple of things. So really cool. And
my son Anthony teaches on our training. He teaches a 3-step reframe, which is pretty much the Rossi thing. When you're ready to look at this, your hands will come together. Yeah. As you look at all the things that are attached to that hand goes down. Yeah. The resolution, this hand comes down, and when it's ready to do this, the hands come together. It's a very simple reframe.
And the only real difference is that all those instructive words, or those guiding words, I leave out.
Yeah. Just let.
And they do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But what they'll do is some of them will go like this, and some will go there, and some will go down, and some will go up there here. My wife did a beautiful one of those as a demonstration. She's great. She just gets into it. And her hands were there. And I was saying, and I wonder if that hand will begin to fall towards your lap. And of course, to be annoying, her hand just went out to the side. But as it turned out, what she was doing was she was processing something to do with her. She'd lost a number of clients through finally succumbing. She deals with a lot of terminally ill people and so on and so forth. And what she was saying is, my hand gets so hot and I just wanted to move my hand away from me. So by saying it goes down here, that can be confusing. But the essence of it is, the vast majority of time, it isn't. And we can have big discussions about what's going on up here, and perhaps in what are some of the things going on in here as to why that's such a reliable thing to be confident with.
I think, from what you're saying, and let me give you an analogy, if you like, or a story from my own life. Years ago, I went out with a girl who was an artist, and she took me to this gallery in London. And being a Philistine, there was a big painting of like 4 blocks of colour. Yeah. And I said to her, it was worth millions and millions. And I said, I could paint that. It's just 4 blocks of colour. And she said, you're missing the point. She said, before he painted that, he painted this. And there was a fine piece of art. He could do that. He could do all the intricate stuff. But what he got down to was the essence of what creates an emotion within you, what makes you think. And that was a very...
I had the same experience in the Picasso Museum.
Yeah.
I was wandering around, loved the stuff, but I hit a bunch of sketches that he'd done that were lifelike sketches. And I thought, oh, good, he can paint. And then I had some really interesting realizations about what the Picasso thing means to me, which is really cool. And this is the final one, which I didn't talk about, was the curiosity for meaning. And when you find the meaning, when it becomes self-engaged, just that's when it all happens, which is what you say. We facilitate the
And if you can, my attitude, we're talking about hypnosis, it's about, if you can fascinate as well. If you can get someone fascinated about it, that's the new... Yeah, that's it, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. So it's been fantastic meeting you. Fantastic speaking. I'm going to see you in person, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm actually in Warsaw at the moment. So if the signal's not that good, I'm sitting in a hotel room in Warsaw, in Poland.
It's better than my hotel room when I was in London last year, I tell you.
But anyway, I'll say goodbye to you. And thanks again from everyone who's watching this and everyone that's going to watch it. I loved it. And I would suggest to everyone, if you haven't already got Richard's book, go and get it. Because it's the 4 blocks of beautiful colour as opposed to the fine thing, but it's the essence that works. So fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right, let's all go and enjoy everything of the day and the night for some people as well.
Take care. Bye for now.
Bye, Freddie.